right, guys, we are back. You're listening to K-Talk Radio 1640 AM. This is the show, Utah Home Sweet Home. I am your host, Yoshi Shiraki. Our special guest is attorney Jeff Brailio, and we are talking about seller financing transactions. And it is the Nightmare Story Time. And I'll tell you why I like the Nightmare Story Time. I used to office with a friend of mine, Trevor Thompson. You know Trevor?
I love Trevor Thompson.
Yes, me too. And what was really cool about me officing with Trevor is we would share, bad nightmares that were happening to us at the moment. And then we would be able to sit there and go, wow, I'm so glad you shared that with me because now I don't have to go through that mistake.
That's right.
You don't know what you don't know
until you actually make a mistake.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
learning from others and other mistakes is the best way to learn.
Exactly.
You can experience yourself if you want.
Right.
Go for it.
Go down that road again if
That's right.
you feel like.
Do this without knowing anything.
Right.
Take the gamble, roll the dice.
Exactly. So that's why I like the Nightmare Story, because I get to learn from someone else's mistake, what happened, and then the lesson to be learned is so valuable, I think, for myself and the listeners. And so, Jeff, if you don't mind diving into the Nightmare Story that you have for us today, please.
Yeah, in fact, we're going to share two. We're sharing one a little later, too.
Oh, cool.
Yeah,
cool. Awesome.
Double whammy today.
Yeah.
Okay, this first one was a seller financing transaction.
Okay.
It was in the world of that traditional or note and deed seller financing that is most common.
Yes.
And in this one, this was what we call a subject to deal.
Got it.
Right? Which means the seller really walked away with all their equity in cash, or if they had no equity, and the buyer just comes in and takes over the mortgage payments on the underlying mortgage.
Gotcha.
So the buyer buys the house, owns it, and then the seller kind of goes away, and the seller's not getting any more payments, and then the buyer's just simply making the mortgage payments that currently exist.
Got it.
Right?
Yep.
So the mortgage stayed in place.
Okay.
So they buy the house, they get it rented out, they're keeping it a long-term rental.
Okay.
It's rented out, all great. And then about 2 years later, the sellers call up and they say, hey, we'd like our house back. And my client says, what are you talking about?
Right.
I bought your house.
Yes.
I don't give houses back.
Right. After I buy it.
Yeah, and they're like, no, we didn't sell you the house. We just leased it to you.
Oh.
So that you could then sort of sublease and make money and help us out of a tough situation because we couldn't make the mortgage payment. And they're like, no, we bought your house. Here's the purchase contract that you signed with the purchase price saying that you're going to sell us the house.
Right, and probably closing docs from the
And then we had closing docs.
Yeah.
And one of them is a warranty deed, which actually transfers title. I mean, they signed a deed giving ownership of the house to my clients, right?
Yeah.
They signed even a 1099 tax statement that they've sold the house. Yeah, and all the other closing docs. And 2 years later, their argument was that, and the real issue came up because they ended up speaking with, I would say, a disreputable attorney, or at the very least, an inexperienced attorney, which I don't really think he was, because I think he did have experience in real estate, which is why I say disreputable.
Yeah.
But didn't truly understand seller. But you do see this even with attorneys who don't understand seller financing.
Sure.
And they see that mortgage that's still there, right? And their thought process is, wait a minute, if this mortgage stayed in place, the house couldn't have sold, because you have to pay off the mortgage when a house sells.
Right.
Which is not the case.
Right.
Yes, there is a due on sale clause,
right,
where the bank says, if you sell the house, we can call the note due, which means we have the right to make you pay it off.
Right.
You don't have to pay off the house when you sell it.
Right.
It's just the bank, if they find out and if they want, they can say, yes, you do have to pay off the note. Okay?
Right.
But if they don't say you have to pay off the note, you don't have to pay it off.
Yeah.
Right. And so I've seen, sort of inexperienced attorneys say, no, you have to give the house back because you never paid off the mortgage and you can't do that.
Right.
And then I'm like, well, yes, you can.
Right.
And in fact, it's probably done millions of times a month across the country.
Right.
I mean, it is a very common investor technique.
Yeah.
And I have clients here in Utah that are probably close to 100 properties in these seller financing transactions where the underlying mortgage is staying in place.
Yes, and if I understand correctly, most commercial transactions have a portion of seller finance. Big, multi-million-dollar commercial deals have some segment.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so the attorney and the sellers would not back down. When we provided copies, like, look, here's the purchase agreement that your client signed. Here's the warranty deed that your client signed. They sold the house. What more can we tell you about this that you're not understanding?
Right.
So they actually ended up going before a judge.
Oh, wow.
Because they just wouldn't back down. I think they were maybe hoping for some settlement or cash payout, some additional money. Because obviously what had happened, and this is the real reason, what happened over the last 2 years?
The values went up.
The value of the house went up, and so now these, the previous sellers are seeing, $40,000 or $50,000 in equity in their house.
Yeah.
Well, wait a minute, shouldn't I get some of that?
Right.
Kind of thing.
Right.
And I think the attorney's probably thinking, hey, well, they'll maybe pay $5,000 or $10,000 to settle all of this.
Yeah.
And I get some money.
Right.
And that's not the kind of law practice I've ever engaged in. I don't believe in that, but that does happen quite often.
Sure.
So anyways, what happened was my clients were successful. They won. They did have to spend a few $1,000s in legal fees to protect their position and their rights, but they won, and the reason they won was because they had the right documents. They had a good seller financing specific contract. And this is something investors really don't do.
Right.
And as much as I beat my chest and scream from the rooftops,
that
if you have a seller financing deal where there's a mortgage staying in place, that is a risk. Not only the sellers, in fact, I've seen sellers come back 5 times in the last 2 years.
Wow.
The other situation where they come back is the seller, maybe 2 years later, wants to buy a new house. And they go to their loan officer to get a loan and a mortgage for their new house, and the loan officer says, I can't get you the loan because you still have this mortgage on your credit report.
Right.
Because the loan officer doesn't understand that he can still get them the loan, even with that in place, and it happens all the time. The sellers just need to speak to the right kind of loan officer who's experienced in those kinds of mortgages, and you can still get it.
Yeah.
But they see that, and the loan officer says, "Oh, what happened? Why did those buyers pay it off? They did something illegal," and then the whole thing kind of blows up.
Yeah.
And it's just from lack of experience and lack of education on seller financing deals that put things into the heads of sellers.
Right.
So they do often come back, and sometimes that due on sell clause, for other reasons, might get called due.
Sure.
Right.
Right.
So you want a contract that really defines that there is an underlying mortgage, that it's going to stay in place, it's going to stay on the seller's credit until it's paid off, whenever that is.
Right.
That the seller understands that the seller may need to, may make getting a new mortgage more difficult, but it can be done.
Right.
And what happens if that note is called due?
Yeah.
And so many investors don't get that into their initial contracts, and then when sellers come back, you've just opened the door to more arguments.
Yeah.
And even though you're probably still going to be successful defending yourself, the more arguments you give those sellers, the more expensive it is to get your way back out.
Right.
So you want things really tight, really buttoned up, all the right terminology, clauses, and in my seller, I even have sellers initial each one of those paragraphs rather than just a bonus. So they really understand, and the investor buyer should really be explaining this to the sellers.
Yeah.
And I see a lot of investors not truly help the sellers understand what's going on.
Right.
And then later they're confused, and when they're confused, they talk to friends or attorneys, and then they get the wrong information, and then you've got a bad situation.
Right.
So not only get good documents, but explain to the seller, hey, in 2 years, if you do want a mortgage, you can get a new mortgage with this still in place. You just have to talk to the right people and get the right information, and you can solve so many problems simply by educating your sellers.
That makes sense. And that was great that you shared that you've seen this like 5 times recently. Probably in the down market, you didn't ever see it.
Yeah, you wouldn't see it in from 2009 to 2014 because home values stayed pretty low.
Yeah.
But in the last 4 years, we've saw such high appreciation rate.
Yes.
Sellers are seeing that, and they're regretting selling their house for so cheaply years earlier.
Right. Yeah, in the down market, 2-3 years later, it could have even been less. So now they're like excited they sold it at that price, right? And because they're like, now the investor's going, crap, why did I buy this? Even though he got a seller financing, now he's having this undervalued property that's going down year after year. So yeah, absolutely, I think that's great because whenever I've chatted with sellers about seller financing, I share with them what happened back then. Values could go down, but values could go up depending on what happens. Think that through before you agree to something like this, because if values go up, you might have a little bit of remorse that you sold it this way.
Yeah.
If values go down, I'll probably be one with the remorse. But I think
the other thing on that due on sale clause, because
Yeah.
a lot of investors freak out about it. Experienced investors don't even think about it.
Right.
There are a lot of red flags that you can reduce and eliminate to prevent the bank finding out and calling it due.
Right.
And we teach that in some of our courses. But now I kind of forgot where I was totally going with due on sale clause. Interest rates.
Yeah.
There's always the fear that if interest rates start to go back up,
Yeah.
banks will start actually calling notes due.
Oh, sure.
During downtimes and low interest rates, they're just happy to get the payment. They don't care who's making it.
Right.
And so after 2008, the crash, and they're like, investors were worried that as the times got better, that banks would start increasing interest rates.
Yeah.
And why would a bank leave a mortgage with 4% interest when they know if they call the note due and force somebody to refinance, they're going to get a 6% interest rate.
Right.
And so banks would be more likely to call the notes due if interest rates go up. We never really see interest rates go up a whole lot.
Right.
And to this day, I don't really see a lot. It does happen, absolutely.
Right.
It happens a handful of times. It's usually because somebody says something to the bank that they shouldn't have said.
Right.
It's usually user error than anything else. And you can correct user error.
Right.
But it is something to be prepared for,
Yep.
and have an extra strategy.
Okay. Awesome. All right. Perfect. We are going to take another commercial break. When we come back, Jeff is going to dive into the documents needed for this type of transaction, because guys, you're hearing about this right now, but without the proper paperwork, how do we even move forward? So Jeff's going to break that down for us here shortly, so stay tuned. We'll be right back.